Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Children, Young People and Families Cabinet Panel on Wednesday, the 7th of February 2024. The Council will be holding this meeting in person, and this meeting will be webcast live on the internet and will also be recorded and published on the Council's website. All parts of the room can be seen and heard by the cameras and microphones, and any members of the press and public present in the Council chamber in this committee room during the meeting are likely to be included in the webcast and meeting. There is no speaker scheduling system in this committee room, so please raise your hand if you wish to speak, and members and officers joining on Teams should indicate in the usual way. Thank you. And reminder to colleagues, please, to speak into the microphones just to improve the audio in the room. Thank you very much. Voting will be by show of hands. To enable everyone to hear the speakers, just a reminder, please speak clearly and directly into your microphones. Membership changes. Richard Fake is filling the vacancy on the Cabinet panel for this meeting only. Welcome, Richard. Very pleased to have you with us this morning. Apologies, I've not received any apologies. Thank you. Colleagues, members are advised that in respect of the debate concerning the Council's integrated plan, including the setting of the Council tax precept, Standards Committee has exercised its power to grant dispensation to all Hertfordshire County Councillors from the requirement to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or a declarable interest. Accordingly, there is no requirement for any councillor to make any declaration of interest in respect of this item of business. Members are reminded that Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act of 1992 provides that if a member is in arrears of council tax for 2 months or more and they are present at a meeting where the council's budget or the precept is being considered, then they should declare this. And any such member must not vote on any matter relating to the setting of the council's budget or the precept. The provisions of Section 106 of the Local Government Finance Act 1992 apply even if there is an arrangement to pay off the arrears. Colleagues, would anybody wish to declare any pecuniary or declarable interest? No, none received. Thank you very much. Colleagues, can I ask you to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November 2023 as a correct record? Could I see by a show of hands? Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, Richard. That is confirmed. Public petitions, we have received none. And Anthony.
I had a question arising from the minutes, just for, if I could ask it. It's just that there are a couple of references to a report coming to this meeting. I think it's in 5.9, and actually it's repeated.
Anthony, sorry to interrupt. Could you press your the centre button again, please? Just you.
Centre button.
The centre button. Do you have a centre button? Oh, just one button. For some reason, it's showing red, so I don't think it's picking you up online. It should be going green.
It's now going green.
That's working.
That's now working. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of references. 5.9. I think it's repeated in 8.4. Saying there's going to be an update report about children looked after, in particular reference to education, employment and training. In a way, that is the content of the performance report, that report, or have we been promised a report which we haven't got?
No, thank you very much, Anthony. This report will be coming to the March panel. So next month's panel, there will be a detailed report on support for care leavers and children looked after, and that will include all of that detail. You will recall at a previous panel meeting, I requested that this come forward. So in the minutes, it suggests it's coming to this meeting, but actually a more detailed update and full report will be coming to the March meeting. But of course, we will discuss performance within the performance element of today's meeting. Thank you. Miranda.
So at the March meeting, there's 2 reports, Anthony. So there'll be a dedicated report, especially explaining what we're doing to seek to address our numbers of care leavers not in education, employment and training. And there'll be an additional report which details all the support that we're providing to care leavers.
Thank you very much. Okay, so moving to the first substantive item. So this relates to the Integrated Plan 24-25 to 27-28. And this report will be highlighting the areas of the integrated plan relating to children, young people and families in order for panel to consider and provide comment. And I'm delighted to introduce Rachel Adler, Director of Business Support, to introduce this item. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, panel. I brought to you today the report on the integrated plan, as just noted, for this portfolio, so for children, young people and families. As noted in section 1, the purpose, as already mentioned, is to highlight the areas of the integrated plan which relate to this portfolio, and for panel to consider these and provide comments. And just by way, I suppose, background on process, we have over the past couple of weeks been through the scrutiny process for the integrated plan, and this report comes to panel today for you to consider, and would then go on to Cabinet and full Council next week. So just by way of introduction on its journey through the governance process. The report in section 1 also asks members to consider the full draft integrated plan documentation that is online, circulated for the Cabinet meeting of the 15th, which goes into the full detail and includes sections on this portfolio. Section 2 of the report looks to just give a summary of the overall council draft integrated plan, and within that, in paragraph just after 2.12, there's reference to the areas of investment across the draft integrated plan, of which you'll see sections around children's services. So that sits within this portfolio. Section 3 has the recommendations, which for panel to note and comment on the content of this report, the integrated plan, to Cabinet, and any proposals. And panel's also asked to identify any issues it feels like Cabinet, and that's Cabinet on the 12th of February, to consider in finalising the integrated plan proposals. Lastly, in section 4, there's paragraphs starting 4.1 to just help navigate through the various sections of the draft integrated plan, and there's reference in 4.2 to the specific pages for the Part B for this children, young people and families portfolio, which goes into the detail of the IP, and shows you the detail behind the revenue summary table that's in section 4.3, which shows you the revenue budget for this portfolio for 24-25 through to 27-28, and the movements between the opening and closing budget, all of which is shown in detail in Part B, referenced in the pages above. So further detail can be found in Part B for the revenue budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you to officers and members for all of the work carried out in the run-up to this process, including the recent scrutiny topic group, which Richard chaired. Thank you very much, and which I thought was incredibly helpful for us to hear the questions and hopefully to be able to reassure members on the plans for children's services moving forward. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Steve, thank you.
Yes, 2 things. The Q3 outturn figures that are going to the resources panel tomorrow showed that the level of additional overspend in particularly children looked after has increased compared with what was forecast at the time the IP was put together. So what impact does that have for the numbers in the IP, given that the starting position at the end of this year will be a larger level of spend than was forecast at the time of the IP? I've got some other comments as well, but perhaps we'll deal with that one first.
Rachel, thank you if you're happy to come back on that.
No problem. Yes, you've seen the performance report, and there is continued pressure as we work through this year on particularly provide inflation and the average cost of our placements. I would also point to there's continued work around in our transformation programmes as well to support mitigation of those cost pressures, but it's something that we're keeping kind of close monitoring of how this year progresses. And what that means to the assumptions, we'd have built in an element of inflation and budget growth into next year, but it's an area that we're keeping close watch on.
I guess the question arising from that must be: do we still believe that the inflation and incremental provision that's included next year is still sufficient in the light of what we now know?
As I say, I know that we're still working through the detail, but there is a significant uplift that you see in the paper on the CLA numbers, and also continued success in the programmes we've got around the transform. So I'd say we're still working through the detail, but there is a significant uplift to that budget next year, and we're obviously working to that.
No, thank you very much, Rachel. And Steve, I mean, I think it's a valid question, absolutely noted. You know, we are all conscious within children's services, and this would have been reiterated at the scrutiny. It's a constant monitoring of budgets. How can we create additional savings? You know, the impact of our residential programme, our reducing our dependency on independent placements with their high inflationary pressures. So I think it's, we will continue monitoring and responding as we do. And certainly residential is a good example. We've created 27 children's home residential beds since 2019, which has had a huge impact not only for our children and young people, but in creating additional savings and reducing the cost pressures. So, and we have our residential strategy 2, which is the next phase, and that's to create an additional 22 beds. So there are measures in place, but we are constantly monitoring. I think it's that's what I would expect, and I hope you would expect us to be doing. Thank you.
Clearly the residential strategy is the key to trying to arrest the rate of increase in costs for looked after children, and the scrutiny. I think made a couple of recommendations. One about ensuring the timely delivery of the phase 2, because I'm conscious that there have been some delays in phase 1, some of which may be related to the pandemic and some of which probably aren't. And given the pressure that there is on the budget due to CLA costs, it's clearly important that phase 2 gets delivered on time. And Richard may want to comment on this since he chaired the scrutiny, but I think we identified a need to make sure that was closely monitored, so that was delivered. And then there was a suggestion that there was still a need to go further in terms of bringing more looked after children in a house, both for cost and for standard of care. And I'm not clear whether or not those recommendations from the scrutiny are likely to be something that are taken on board. But I think there's something that certainly should be. I think they're an important step towards trying to address both the cost issue and improve the standard of care that we can provide.
Thank you very much. Miranda, did you want to add? And I can see Joe on screen, so I don't know, Joe, if you want to come in afterwards, but Miranda first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've said this before, we've learned an enormous amount from the first residential strategy. And you're right, some of the delays were down to COVID. There were a lot of delays with building and building supplies, as you'll be well aware of. So we've learned about that. The key things that delay these things are planning permission and Ofsted registration. Now, with some buildings, we don't need planning permission, and with those buildings, we can go ahead really quickly. The one thing that we can't get around is Ofsted registration, and that does take quite a long time. And it's taking even longer at the moment, but due to the legislative changes in October last year, which now require all 16 plus semi-independent residential facilities to be registered as well. So Ofsted have quite a big backlog of those at the moment, several hundred. So Ofsted registration is our sort of key stumbling point, but we do everything we can to get that through quickly, and we have a really good working relationship with our Ofsted link people for residential, and they speed things through for us. They were really helpful with Cherry Tree Cottage and speed that through as quickly as possible. So those are the two sort of key things that hold us up. All this development is being very closely monitored through our Invest to Transform board, which is chaired by Rachel and Finance. We also have a lot of scrutiny through Joint Resources, EMB, and we also have an accommodation board now, which all these projects are being overseen by. So we're looking at it monthly, and Finance are sort of all over it in terms of, looking at whether we're meeting targets. Also, for the March meeting, there'll be a further update. It's in response to questions asked by Councillor Watkins in terms of timing. So we're going to bring a bit more detailed information about timing. But if you want more detailed information about the process for opening a residential home, I'm very happy to supply that outside of this.
Thank you, Miranda. Janet, please.
And just to add alongside that, our work continues at pace, looking at where it's appropriate to do so to bring children who are looked after back into their family homes with the right checks, balances and support around that. So it very much dovetails with the residential strategy, that whole overarching child looked after, invest and transform strategy. So that continues alongside that.
Thank you very much, Janet. Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I also, I obviously very much agree with what Councillor Jarvis has said, especially on the residential strategy, and obviously the questions that were raised at overview last week. And I would hope that although we're going to get that report in March, that that can be fed through and go into plans within this next financial year as soon as practical. And also, just generally on the budget report, your report, obviously I welcome the 5 million from last May, the extra 2 million the administration is putting in. I think it's well past, I think it took a long time. Sadly, this should have gone a few years back, that many of us were asking for this extra money to be put into SEND. Finally did the 5 million last May, and then the extra 2 million, and I'm sure many of us will be looking at other ways we can also add other monies into SEND, but let's hope that gets going. I do have another point on the budget, and I did want to make a point, especially if you let me, and also Chair, and also I'd like to put forward a recommendation from the panel. Can I read that out? Just to do with the care leavers exemption, which obviously you've got in the budget. So obviously I welcome finally clearly the U-turn politically by the administration on including a council tax exemption in the budget for our care leavers. And of course, I'll say so that the Labour group, myself, Baroness Taylor, have included in our budget plans going back every year for at least 5 years about this. And I've asked questions at full council going back to the previous portfolio holder, Councillor Teresa Heritage. We were always told it was too complex. We have to talk to districts, etc., even though our young people themselves mentioned in their scrutiny they needed it. Many councils across the country have got on with this and proactively went out of their way to work towards a solution with their districts to help our most vulnerable young people, and already introduced it. So through you, Chair, I don't know if we want to say it now, but I would like to put forward a recommendation from this panel to Cabinet that the council tax exemption for our care leavers be from 18 to 25 years old, and it's much more practical. Many other authorities do this rather than the 18 to 21. That the administration is proposing. I hope that in the spirit of helping some of our most vulnerable care leavers, children and therefore care leavers, get a stable start after care, it will be very welcome to them. So I don't know if you need to do that now, if you want to do that at the end, if other people have got recommendations and thoughts.
Thank you very much. And just picking up on the point about the support for care leavers regarding council tax, you use the word U-turn. I think this is a very positive step, and it's something I've been committed to delivering since I took on the portfolio. And I'm very pleased that we are able to be bringing this forward for our care leavers. And at the recent scrutiny, the CHIC scrutiny, this was something that they have highlighted. This item will also be included in the reports coming to March, and I think it will demonstrate the scale and the breadth of support for our care leavers, which is incredibly important. Councils up and down the country, there is a variety of support. Some, I'm aware, will support up to the age of 21, some will support up to the age of 25. And our proposal is to support up to the age of 21. And within the context, I suppose, of the challenges of the Children's Services budget as a whole, then for the first year, I think this is an appropriate proposal. And again, it's a very positive step for our care leavers, and I think it will make a real difference to them. Can I bring in Janet or Miranda just to add any more on that? Thank you.
Happy to, and obviously we welcome that the step is a really positive step, and we do have the next period of time to see what that looks like. Our officers have looked very carefully at all the different options available to implement this in the most effective way for everybody and the most seamless way for our care leaving young people. So we do now have this period where we can see how this works in the coming year. But that, as the chair says, that will be included within the updates that come to March panel alongside. It opens the doors for us to really build on our corporate parenting offer for our care experienced young people.
Can I come back to you? Yeah. Yeah, I welcome, obviously, your change of heart. Politically what you say is not you. Oh, sorry. I welcome, obviously, what you've changed.
It's turned off.
Yeah.
Okay. So I welcome the change on the administration's part, but from our point of view, obviously, we have been calling for this. As I say, going back 4 or 5 years, it's a positive change, but I wish it had come, when we originally called for it. So I do think that it would be good going forward to the budget next week, if you did include it from 18 to 25, as I say, as other authorities are already doing. And that's why, and obviously, we will, as our Labour amendment, put this as part of our Labour amendment next Tuesday at the budget. Obviously, I'm signalling now, but it would be good if the panel here can recommend that 18 to 25.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nigel. I'll take officers' view on this, and then I'll come to you, Anthony. My view would be, as the proposals in the draft budget are for up to age 21, that will need to go forward to Cabinet and then on to Council. I understand you will be proposing your own amendments.
18 to 25.
And I would suggest, but I'm happy for officers to correct me on the process, I would suggest then that the Council would be the place for that discussion, for that additional item to be discussed. And the reason I say that is because in the context of the draft IP as it stands, increasing up to the age of 25 has not been costed. And so I'm looking to finance colleagues, and I would, I guess I would be, I think it would be wiser to consider the draft IP as it has been put before us, and then any amendments would come forward at full council, as you would expect opposition colleagues to do. Rachel, could you just...
Yes, Chairman, you're absolutely all right. So I suppose I just reference paragraph 3.2, where it notes that as part of the recommendations, that's panel's asked to identify any issues that it feels Cabinet should consider, and that's the Cabinet on the 12th. So as you say, there's the 18 to 21 as part of the draft IP, but perhaps that will be noted as part of recommendation 3.2 as a consideration.
That's why I wanted to put out our recommendation from today. I understand we can argue about process. Obviously, as I say, we were putting that forward in our amendment, but I just wanted us to be able to put forward a vote today as a recommendation from this panel.
Thank you. Let's take Anthony next, and then we can come back to this. Thank you.
Just a couple of points. One is, having sat on this panel now for about 6 years, I know Nigel's been on it for longer, but I can certainly testify that Nigel has repeatedly raised this, and I, as it were, more latterly have also supported the fact that we weren't providing the support that we should be for these young people in terms of council tax. Just the other point for the, as it were, public record is that I remember we raised the point, well, what has the Department for Education, I think that's a relevant department, said about this, and it was reported back to us that representations had been made by this local authority to the department, and that the answer, I use my own words, was a matter of almost pass the buck, utter indifference and no help at all. So we haven't been aided again by what central government has sought to do or not to do on this very obvious area of potential support for young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, noted. Thank you very much. Stephen, I can see you've come online. Did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question. I wanted to make a comment, if I may, that I'm struggling to hear some of the sound from the room there. It's not coming out as clear as I would like it to.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Stephen. And so, colleagues, just a reminder, when you are speaking, could you just move the microphones very close to you and speak directly into? Is that better sound, Stephen, online? Is that improved?
Yes,
okay.
It is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. Steve, please.
Thanks. Just on the question of council tax for care leavers, I think I'm very sympathetic with the point that Nigel makes about the desirability of extending it to the age of 25. However, I also understand the point that you've made about the totality of the IP budget, and for that reason, we will be making some proposals about that, but we'll be doing that in the council meeting because there are clearly implications across the council. There are some areas of children's services where we would wish to see some extra things done, but I believe they can't be done in isolation. So I'm very, very, very happy with the notion that we should find a way to do that. And next week we'll tell you what we think it is.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And of course, as with anything within children's services, we would be constantly reviewing throughout the year going forward. That would be a matter of course, and that would include the support for care leavers. Richard, thank you.
Yes, if I may, Chairman. Yeah, is that better? Yeah, if I may. It is refreshing that at long last, those parties who have a different approach to the administration in terms of delivering these sensitive services are actually using the cabinet panels to announce that they wish us to consider a different way of applying the budget. It's for years and years and years this has been brought to full council on the day of the budget debate, which is far too late for anyone to even, the fact that it's being signalled and that there's an intent is very refreshing indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Noted. Janet, please.
I think just to add, because this, we will start doing this from the 1st of April, we'll work really closely with all of our care experienced young people to look at the relevant reductions that they can apply for, support them through that process. And that will give us a really clear picture of the exact cost as well, and it will help us to be able to then review what is possible in the future as well. So it'll be a learning process for us as well as officers to see how that support works over the coming year.
Thank you, Janet. And as I said, this is an incredibly positive step for our care leavers, and I'm very pleased that this is coming forward. And thank you for the cross-party support for it for our care leavers. This is about improving outcomes for our children and young people, care leavers, and that is what we're committed to doing. So thank you. Colleagues, any other comments or questions? No, nothing online. Thank you very much. Colleagues, can we move to the recommendation? Just once again, thank you to everybody involved in the IP process, getting us to this date. Huge amount of work happening across children's services. And of course, we know that, as Rachel has outlined, the pressures within children's services nationally continue, and specifically around the cost of inflationary pressures and dependent placements and home to school transport. But we have plans in place, our residential strategy, for example, to bring down the cost and to support more of our children and young people in-house, which is good for them and has a positive impact on our budget. And so our residential strategy is key to that. Colleagues, we are asked to note and comment on the content of the report and to endorse to Cabinet the proposals relating to the integrated plan in respect of children, young people and families portfolio. And the panel is also asked to identify any issues that it feels the Cabinet should consider in finalising the integrated plan proposals, an item noted from colleagues, from Nigel. Thank you. Colleagues, can we agree the recommendations by show of hands, please? All those for? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. All those against? We have no against, and any abstentions, please. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rachel. Item 4 is the Children, Young People and Families Q2 Performance Report. And Paul Dryden, our Senior Performance and Development Manager, will be introducing this item. Just before I hand over to Paul, and just to highlight something that has been raised at previous meetings in relation to the timings of the quarterly performance reports coming to panel. So clearly this is Q2 and yet we are in Q4, but to reassure members that following conversations with the Democratic Services and the new calendar will be more timely apportioned. So we should see the performance reports coming to panel in a timely fashion. So that's something I had said I would chase up, and I'm pleased to report that that will be the case in the forthcoming year. Maybe one exception, but then otherwise it will fall into line. Thank you very much. Nigel.
Yeah, just to highlight, I have had parents contact me to say, and I can't see that's in this report or in the budget, that the government apparently has removed hearing support from SEN. Do we know any more about that, or can that be followed up? Hearing impairment, maybe I should say, or hearing support, hearing impairment from SEN.
No, thank you for that.
That be followed up?
So I don't have that information, and we don't have SEND officers here, Nigel, who could perhaps answer that. However, we will take this away as an action, right. And if we could have an update to all members of the panel, please, and then just to liaise with Caroline Clappy, the exec member for Education, Libraries and Lifelong Learning as well. Thank you, Nigel. Paul Dryden, please, Director of Business Support, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully that's coming through. As mentioned, we're going through the Q2 performance, which is July through September.
Can you hold the microphone?
Yeah.
You need to be.
No problem.
You probably need to be about an inch of old money away from the microphone. So just, you can angle it higher. There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Let me know if you can't hear. But so we're going through the Q2 performance, which is July through September. But conscious, as Chairman mentioned, we're now in Q4, so I will be bringing some bits as well and updating everyone on the latest position at the end of Q3 as well. And in the future, we'll have more timely meetings, so that will help. Also, just to note that the Department for Education has published its national data, so I'll be referencing that as well, and that's data for up to the year ending March 2023, so we can get a picture of where Hertfordshire sits in the national picture. So first, looking at our targeted services and early help. If we look at the number of Families First assessments, in Q2, there was 164 Families First assessments, which is a slight reduction on the previous quarter. However, it's higher than the equivalent quarter in the previous year. Within our SASH service, we had 63 assessments, which is a slight reduction on the previous quarter and a reduction on 82 in the previous equivalent quarter in the previous year. What that means in total numbers of assessments, we had 227, which relates to 435 children and young people. Next, looking at the referrals coming into children's social care. So between April and September, there's been approximately 20% more referrals than 2019-20, which is the pre-pandemic period. If you look at the chart on the screen, that's the pre-pandemic period is the orange line, the red line is last year, and the blue line is this year. What we found is at the beginning of the financial year, so April through June, the numbers were actually lower than last year. However, in July and September, they were actually higher than the previous year. Good news is actually that September through December, we've actually seen reductions again. So it looks like overall, the number of referrals that we're seeing into children's social care will be lower than last year, though it won't have returned to the pre-pandemic levels, and it may be unlikely that we'll return back to those levels in the near future. Where does that show sort of Hertfordshire in the national picture? Actually, Hertfordshire's got the third lowest rate of referrals into children's social care, which is reflective of our strong early help offer, meaning that we've worked with families before they come into statutory services. Next, looking at our child and family assessments. So statutory guidance is that a children's social care child and family assessment should be approved within 45 days. For that, the performance remains really strong. So we're at 93.5% at the end of September. The top quartile nationally is 89.7%, so we're comfortably within that top quartile. And actually, when you look at the rankings in the country, Hertfordshire's in 22-23 was the 12th best performing local authority for this measure. And just to sort of say the national performance is 82% and our statistical neighbours are at 83%. Next, looking at initial child protection conferences within timescales. So an initial child protection conference has to happen within 15 days of the start of the Section 47 investigation. And that's the point where it's identified that there's potentially a child protection need. Performance in September reduced to 82.5%. This is lower than where we'd expect it to be. If you look back at previous months, performance is generally stronger than this. And we had a few months, so back in September 2022, January 2023 and April 2023, where we achieved 100%. And those 3 times were the first times we'd ever achieved 100% in this measure. So it shows that we can achieve that. The good news is actually the performance has improved. So in November, it improved to 85.6% and November 85.3%. And actually January is now over 90%. So we know that performance has now improved following some focused work on making sure that social workers were aware of the requirements to make sure that the child protection conference was scheduled within time. Our end of year performance for the 2022-23 year, which, as I mentioned, has just been published, was in the top quartile, which is above 86.5%. Next is children subject to a child protection plan. So at the end of September, we had 390 children subject to a child protection plan, and that's a 16.3% reduction compared with September 2022. Hertfordshire actually has the lowest rate in the country for numbers of children subject to a child protection plan, and that's reflective of the strong work around family safeguarding, making sure that children don't remain on plans for too long and they're supported at the appropriate level. Numbers have since increased to 446. Which actually, if you look back at the historical data on the chart, is more or less in line with where we would be historically, so that the number of 390 was deemed to be actually quite low for Hertfordshire. So 446 is more of a sort of return to where we'd normally expect to be. Over the same period, children in need plans have reduced from 919 in September 2022 to 860. However, they've also increased since, and 860 was also deemed to be a low number of children supported on child in need. As part of this, with the numbers reducing, a piece of work was carried out to identify, to make sure all children are still being supported. What we found is that sort of as children reduced that were subject to child protection plans and child in need, we did see increases in early help. So children were still being supported, but at different levels of the continuum. Next is the number of children subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. So this quarter we've seen an increase. It's gone up to 19.9%. And for those who've returned within 2 years, it's gone up to 9.6%. This is higher than we'd expect it to be, and some work has been carried out to identify the reasons behind why that is happening, and also to strengthen guidance to make sure that when children are stepped down from a child protection plan, the appropriate support's put in. And we expect this to sort of start to improve during Q4. And we're starting to see some evidence of improvement. It will take some time for this measure to improve because it's over a 12-month period, but we are starting to see signs of improvement here. Next is our numbers of children looked after. So the numbers of children looked after, excluding separated migrant children, have reduced by 12 between Q1 and Q2 to 825. And the current numbers are actually at 816. That's the lowest number since 2019, and it's only about 10 off the lowest number of children looked after, excluding separated migrant children, as far back as records go. So a really big achievement around reducing the numbers of children in care. The number of separated migrant children has increased from 136 to 149, and it's currently at 147. Where we rank in the overall country is that Hertfordshire's got the 11th lowest rate of children looked after. Next, looking at the number of children with 3 or more homes. 8.8% of our children looked after had 3 or more homes in the last 12 months. That relates to 86 children, and that was a reduction from 9.4% in June. The current performance is also at 8.8%, and that would put us in the second quartile nationally. So to get into the top quartile, we need to be below 8%, but the national average is currently at 10%. We've actually seen an increase in our statistical neighbours, which has gone up from 10% to 11%. So this is a really strong achievement, and those who've been members of this cabinet for a long time will remember 3 or 4 years ago we were actually at 13% for this measure, and so 8.8% is a really big improvement, and it will be a really big success story if we're at that level at the end of the year. Next is the number of children, sensitive children exiting care via adoption or special guardianship order. So the children exiting care to adoption in the last 12 months has got up to 10.3%, and that's the highest point it's been in September over the last 4 years. The current performance is actually over 13%, which is the highest it's been since the pandemic, which is really, really strong performance for adoption. For special guardianship orders, we've seen a reduction, so that's gone down to 7.2%, and that's the lowest point it's been compared with equivalent periods over the last few years. Next, looking at care leavers aged 17 to 21 in education, employment or training. So we've seen an improvement this quarter. So when we reported in the last quarter, it was at 47.9%. It's since gone up to 52.3%. However, that is slightly lower than where it was in September 2022 at 53%. And as mentioned earlier, there'll be some papers brought to the March panel, which will give more detail around the specific work that's going on to improve the number of care leavers and children looked after in education, employment and training. So next, I just wanted to share some slides. So there were some questions at the previous panel around our numbers of children looked after. And when we showed the information, it showed an overrepresentation of children from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. But it did include our separated migrant children, which are roughly about 14% of our children looked after population. So what I've done is actually taken out the separated migrant children and looked at the Hertfordshire resident children, and looked at sort of where we've got areas of overrepresentation. I just thought it useful to share this with the panel. So the first thing to note is children of mixed or dual heritage are overrepresented. So if you see the blue chart on the left, that shows the children looked after population, and the purple chart on the right shows the 2021 census breakdown by ethnicity. As you can see there, so it might be quite hard to see on the screen, but basically, yeah, so. Yeah, no, I'll circulate this round after so everyone can have a look at it.
I was just going to ask if you could circulate it.
No problem, I'll do it straight after the
And of
meeting.
course, a reminder to colleagues, maybe we need to join Teams online so we can access it but keep our cameras and microphones off, and then we can access it on our laptops just for future panel meetings. But if you could circulate that, Paul, I think, because we'd asked specifically for this slide, so it's important to be able to see what the detail is. Thank you.
So it's for the children from mixed heritage backgrounds, 15.3% of our children looked after, compared with 8.9% in the census. So that's an overrepresentation of 6.4 percentage points. For white British children and white Irish children, that accounts for 69.7% of our children looked after population, compared with 65.6% of the what's in the census. So they're overrepresented by 4.1 percentage points. And black or British children are overrepresented by 0.4 percentage points. Asian British children and white other children. White other children includes children from European backgrounds, and also Irish traveller and Gypsy Roma children as well. They're underrepresented, as are Asian and Asian British children. And the other request was looking at the breakdowns by ethnicity, and actually how does that break down by gender as well. So what we found is that males are slightly overrepresented in the white or white British Irish group. So we've got 52.37% male in the white British Irish group, compared to 47.6% female within that group. For the white other groups and the mixed heritage groups, it's actually a fairly even split, which is sort of lines up with what's in the census. Black male children are overrepresented, so there's 57.6% of black British children looked after are male, and 42.4% are female. It's worth noting that we don't have a large number of children from that background in care, so there's only 33 children overall. So that might sort of lean into some of that. But it's sort of, in real numbers, it's 19 out of the 33 are male. There's quite a large, if you look on the left-hand side, there's quite a large overrepresentation of Asian males and also those from other backgrounds. However, those numbers are very, very small, sort of less than 20. So I wouldn't say that was statistically significant, but it's just sort of worth noting there is an overrepresentation there. And then last is just an update. So based on current performance, where does everything fit within the quartiles? So we still have a range of measures, as I've mentioned, that are within the top quartiles, such as assessments in time, our referral rates, children looked after rates, child protection, also re-referrals coming in, and the number of child protection plans that last for 2 years and more. Within the second quartile, we've got children subject to a second or subsequent child protection plan, and we're not too far off being able to get into the top quartile there, so that's potentially possible. 3+ placements, where we've seen a big improvement. It was at one point in the fourth quartile. It's currently in the second quartile, but to be in the top, we need to be less than 8%. Care leavers and suitable accommodations currently 84.9%, and to be in the top quartile, we need to be above 90. And the current performance for initial child protection conferences at 82.5%. Puts us in the second quartile, but most months' performance is actually in the top quartile, and I'd expect that to return back into the top quartile. Two areas that are in the third quartile are children leaving care to adoption. As I mentioned, we're now at 13%, so that would move us into the second quartile. And care leavers in education, employment and training, we'd need to get above 55% to improve that into the second quartile. And that's the last bit. So unless anyone's got any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for outlining some of the key areas and some very strong performance, and clearly some areas where we know we need to do better for our children, young people, and particularly looking at the infographic at the end. And the key priority area is increasing the number of care leavers in education, employment and training. Just before I go to questions, we have also, just to make colleagues aware, we have received an email regarding EHCP performance from a resident, and while there is no panel process for accepting questions here, and as has previously been advised, so specific conversations around SEND and EHC performance would normally be picked up at the ELL panel, and clearly that is where the SEND officers would be as well. So it was to acknowledge the letter, the question that has come in, and to refer that to be picked up within ELL panel's performance discussion on SEND. So thank you. Nigel first, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'm assuming I also got that question, and I did say I would raise it, but I appreciate that you say it's education, and obviously that's referring to item 6.9, isn't it? Well, I've got, about education healthcare plans.
Yes.
So I mean, if I could be reassured that that would be answered by officers, in the next education panel.
So absolutely. So a response would be provided, and as you know, performance on EHCPs, ELL panel is where that would be picked up. As I mentioned earlier, we do not have SEND officers at this meeting. ELL is the correct place for that to be taken.
But obviously, many parents won't understand the split, now, and that's why they've sent that question in. But,
exactly, and that's why I wanted to mention it this morning, so that it has been recognised that performance for EHCs and SEND is covered at ELL. Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask a few others?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, obviously I'm happy and pleased that the Paul's come back with the figures on diversity and inclusion. I think I asked that last time and others, and I just hope that therefore officers will be doing work on that. Obviously that the overrepresentation of black and ethnic minorities, Asian males, and see the reasons and work on it. I obviously still have a lot of issues. Well, I'm pleased, for example, on 9.1 and 2, obviously about the actual figures on looked after children being so low. But as we know, it's a question of how you measure it, and obviously we now have, if you like, the more complex children in our care, so that's what we have to look for. But overall, if you look at the bare figures, that looks much better, obviously, compared to years ago. My other great concern, obviously, is care leavers and NEET at 9.6. I still, while I see that technically this figures for these 3 months are better, clearly it's slightly worse than a year ago or in 22. So I do still think we need to do a lot more for our care leavers, and especially when you look at NEET figures, that we should be doing much more to work with all agencies, with businesses in the county, especially a county as relatively well off, let's be honest, Hertfordshire, compared to many others. We should be doing as much as we can with businesses, other districts and that, to get those care leavers and to not have the same NEET figures for care leavers. So I'll leave it at that, but might come back a bit later. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Nigel. And you know, just to reiterate on the last point, so care leavers not in education employment training is a priority. It's a priority of the Corporate Parenting Board. It's one of my priorities. You're right, this is the county of opportunity. So some amazing work is already happening with employers, but more needs to be done. And that's why I asked for a detailed set of reports outlining what is actually happening and how can we continue to support more of our care leavers. So you'll see within the figures, you know, performance is strong at age 17, but age 20 and 21, I think the performance has reduced. But of course, there could be a number of reasons for that. So it's about members having the reassurance as to what support is there, what the plans are, what future plans are in place. And our target is ambitious. You know, I want to see us at 60% at least. So that's my commitment to get us there. So you're absolutely right. Peter, Paula, then Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased that you've said that we're going to get a report into what the authority is actually physically doing in relation to finding work for our children leaving care. Because with regards to needs, we've always been about the national average or slightly better than average, but I think we've all said, you know, that's still not good enough for us. You know, we want to do far better than that. And historically, you know, we've had data and figures in performance reports, and but what we have been lacking is to actually physically see what tangible efforts are being made to find work for them, and that'll be very, very welcome. So I've said about it before. Nigel said about it, as of others, and so very pleased that that's going to happen. Thank you.
No, thank you, Peter. I think, you know, within this committee, we're all committed to seeing an increase in the performance for our children and young people in education, employment and training. And absolutely, this is where the focus has to be. So moving to Paula next and then Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's so much good reporting here, and even when we're in the second quartile, we're just missing it. Hopefully we will move into the first. But just wanted to highlight that the assessments within 45 days are 89.7%, 12th best in the country. That is excellent, but hopefully we can go even higher. And the Child Protection Conferences within 15 days, these are so important for safeguarding children. And the fact that over 90%, and we were at 100%, hopefully we can go back there, is really good. Just a couple of comments. It's mainly on the adoption and kinship. I know the government and we are doing a lot of work with kinship guardianships, but we're still quite low with them in Hertfordshire, and adoption as well. How are we tackling that to move up, or is there a reason why we are low? And then secondly, on the diversity figures, you know, right the way across the spectrum, it's the males are higher, whether they're black, Asian or white. And are we looking at that? Is there a reason for that, and why? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Paula. So picking up on your last point first around the diversity, so I'm going to hand to Janet for that. Thank you.
Paula, you're right. And actually, it's a trend that we don't just see with our looked after children. It's a trend that we see in other parts of our service. So children supported by child protection plans, for example, you see a similar overrepresentation. There is no one simple answer, but what we are really conscious of is the need to continually educate and address this issue. So there are a number of things in which we do. We're creating more reflexive spaces for workers to develop their own skills, understanding, knowledge, confidence, because we need to have a workforce that is confident in exploring a family's cultural identity in order to be able to support their needs best. Alongside that, we have a training offer again that looks at supporting the workforce again around diversity and inclusion, equity as well, which is really important. And then the final point is around our quality assurance activity around that. So equality, diversity and inclusion forms a key part of all of our quality assurance activity. So we constantly measure ourselves against that and in line with that constantly seek to identify new actions where we can continue to improve that further. So it is absolutely at the top of our agenda and something that we continuously look to seek to improve and to understand.
Thank you, Jan. And then just the adoption kinship.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I know Paul has highlighted how the performance has increased. Certainly with regards to adoption, I think it's now currently at 13%, which is very positive. But Miranda, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. And just, I wanted to also add in relation to diversity and inclusion, all that work is overseen and underpinned by our Children's Diversity and Inclusion Board. And a number of us are sitting on that board. So that's also driving practice. So just to reassure you on that point, Paula. So in terms of, if I maybe talk about adoption, and then I can talk about special guardianship orders and family and friends foster carers or kinship carers. So as you know, performance in terms of the number of children adopted, performance has improved. And I think we've talked about this a number of times, but I think you're all aware that during the pandemic, when the Family Court was unable to sit at the very early stages of the pandemic, they had to prioritise the hearings. And obviously safeguarding was prioritised as, needing to be attended to first, and adoption hearings were left. So there was a bottleneck that has taken sort of quite a long time to work through, and that has created a delay in adoption orders nationwide. So we're sort of through that now. One of the reasons for sort of lower, it's not necessarily a bad thing that, if you have fewer children being adopted, although it is a performance measure. What's really important is permanence. So there are two key things that are really important here. If there is a decision for a child to be adopted, that they are adopted as quickly as possible and that we stick to timescales. But the sort of really important point is whatever the plan for the child, whether it's special guardianship order, return home, long-term fostering or family and friends placement, that permanent plan is made as quickly as possible. And that really, when children are actually brought into care, we're thinking about that plan from the very first day they come into care, so that we have a plan right from the word go. That's what's really important here. Another sort of reason for numbers being lower, of course, is our overall numbers of children looked after are lower. So that's another sort of factor here to consider, both in terms of adoption and special guardianship. In terms of special guardianship orders and family and friends and kinship placements, it's really positive that the government's sort of driving a lot of change here and recognising it more. I'll be open with you. One of the challenges is money and what we pay people. And in terms of special, and this is a national challenge, this is not just something that Hertfordshire are dealing with. So one of the things that we find is sometimes families are less willing to enter down the road of special guardianship orders because they will actually receive less in terms of financial support than they would if they remain as family and friends and kinship carers. So that is an issue, and that's something that we're working with people. But another sort of factor with all of this is it's quite complicated, and there's a number of factors to consider. But another factor to look at in terms of special guardianship orders and in terms of family and friends fostering is sometimes the most appropriate option is for families to be family and friends foster carers, because they get that ongoing support from a dedicated social worker right through until the child turns 18. Sometimes we do a careful assessment of people's ability to look after children and their family, look after other people's children essentially. and we look at their circumstances, at their own lives, at what, in terms of what they have, in terms of their own children they already have to look after. And sometimes it's entirely appropriate that they remain as family and friends foster carers rather than special guardians. Because when people are approved as special guardians by the family court, that's essentially like adoption. They go off, that's the end of it. There's no further social work involvement. So there's a number of considerations. So it's got quite a broad topic really, but to sum it up, what's really important here is permanence, timeliness. If we make a decision that a child should be adopted, that it happens as quickly as possible. But essentially what's really important is that the right decision is made for the child based on assessment. So, if they end up, under a special guardianship order or with family members as family and friends foster carers, that it's the right thing for that child based on their need. I can see Paul wants to come in.
Yeah, please do, Paul.
I just wanted to jump in with some numbers. Just to note, so the number of children we've got that are looked after and fostered by a relative or friend has actually increased by 10. So it was 110 last year, and we're looking at the end of this year is likely to be 120 or more. So I think that sort of reflects that we're seeing more children that are still in care but looked after by family and friends.
No, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for that explanation, which I think was very helpful, because it's clear that it's not just a straightforward, this is the data, it's actually looking behind what's the best for the child, and where is it best for the child to be cared for, would be my understanding from that, Miranda.
That's completely right. It's very easy to think, oh no, we've had fewer children adopted, but what's really important is permanence, what is best for that child based on our assessment, both of the child and the carers, and how quickly we get there.
Thank you. Paula, was there a third part?
Yeah, no, that was very useful and very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And of course, colleagues, I would refer you back to our last panel meeting when we had our annual adoption report and our annual fostering report. There's a huge amount of detail in both of those reports. So if anybody has them, make a cup of tea and sit down and reread them, they're worth reviewing and reading. Thank you. Next, Steve, please.
Thank you. A couple of questions mainly related to the numbers. I mean, the number of child protection conferences within the timescale has gone down and clearly fluctuates a bit. But just measuring the number within timescale doesn't perhaps capture the most significant issue, which is how far outside the timescale they are. Now, if they're all being delivered in 16 days, well, that's not great, but it's perhaps less significant than if some of them are taking significantly longer. So do we have a kind of a longest time as well? And the second relates to, we've got some information about the numbers of referrals into early help. So we understand the quantities. What I'm not clear is if there's any measurement made of the numbers who come into first help, who subsequently access higher levels of help, either children in need or child protection, as a measure of the effectiveness of first help rather than the quantities of first help.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And to reassure you, I have had conversations exactly around those two metrics, because you're absolutely right in terms of the child protection conferences. If, as you say, if they're met within 16, 17 days, that's reassuring. But if some of them are taking 45 days, then clearly that would be an issue. So I will hand over to Janet for that point, and then on the second point, to cover those points. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, the reason why conferences are delayed is a process issue. It's a system that we have to tick, press certain buttons on a system to get certain processes to kick off. And when there are delays, it's because buttons haven't been clicked in the right timescale effectively. Most often that's around children transferring in from other local authorities. So a child be supported by a child protection plan in another local authority, and then they need to move into Hertfordshire. And there's a process around making sure you've got all the relevant paperwork in time for that to happen. And that's where we fall down sometimes. So there is lots of support around making sure that we improve that. but to offer some assurance those children are not sat in limbo with nobody having eyes and ears on them. They are open to another local authority at that time. And work will always continue. We continue to focus on this area. In terms of out over the 15 days, there are not, it's never 45 days. It will be 16, 17. Sometimes the request is made slightly late, but the conference is still held within that time scale. In relation to children stepping between, if you like, different parts of the system, Paul might be able to come in just around some of that step up, step across, step down data, perhaps for next time to think around giving some evidence around those numbers. A high number of children, as shown through our supporting families and the returns that we have to submit centrally in respect of that, show that the outcomes achieved in the early help area are really effective, and children don't tend to need to progress through the surface. And again, we can provide some data around that. There will be a number of children that do need to. We've spoken before many times in panel about the complex needs of our children and young people. So there will be some children that do need to go through that process, which is the right thing to do. So I think what's important is making sure that we have, that we know where the children are. They will fluctuate between different parts of the process, and just being clear on making sure that they get the right support at the right time through those different processes. And I think what's really key within children's social care is making sure that the support we offer to families is proportionate and is on a continuum. So we want to know our families that might need an early help response, then might need a child in need, a child protection response. What we don't want to find ourselves in a position is of not knowing the needs of children and suddenly escalating into court. So we're really keen on supporting families at the proportionate level along that continuum, if that helps.
Thank you. And just before Paul comes in, perhaps Paul, within the narrative for future performance reports, then you could just indicate the timescale for those not met within the 15 days. So, we're talking about very low numbers. If you look at it's 47 out of 57 had their ICPC within 15 days, but clearly what about the other 10? So what's the timescale for those?
And just quickly, that could be 2 families, because it could be 2 large sibling groups. That's numbers of children. So, yeah.
Okay. So I just think that additional context would be helpful. And then, Paul, if you would like to come in on the other point, thank you.
So I've just done a quick look at the actual number of days, and most of them are 3 or 4 days over, the large majority of them for ICPCs. One of the other bits about those who have worked with early help and then come into social care, as part of the information pack we have to provide you in an Ofsted inspection, it looks at how many children in the last 6 months worked with our early help services and have subsequently been referred into children's social care, and it's roughly about 11%.
Thank you very much. And of course, it's important to remember, and which Paul has outlined, we have our performance is very strong as an authority. 2023 England average is 78%, statistical neighbours 82%, Eastern region 86%, and yet consistently we have been up around in the 90s. So I think that's important to remember, and we've hit 100% on many occasions. So it is still very strong performance, but clearly it's just having the additional data. Thank you. Anthony, Steve, had you finished? Thank you. Anthony, please.
Just two points. One is a matter of disappointment. I'm not going to be at the March panel, but I'm not going to make my, as it were, speech about needs and eats now. But I do just want to highlight one point and perhaps put in a request. The paragraph 9.7, which appears either on page 62 or 32, whichever you want to use, is the needs for 6 months or more, where we're being told that the number essentially has doubled over the past year, if I'm reading that correctly. Those are clearly very challenging individuals who are finding all sorts of things a struggle, but it's a difficult figure to see. And I suppose where I'm a bit not disappointed, but I would hope this will be incorporated in the reports that are being prepared for March, that we all sat here, I think about 18 months ago. We certainly had one report about what could be done, particularly by this council, but also by other potential partners, statutory and others, to try and reduce the figure. And the reality is the figure has gone up. There may be other reasons, of course, but I would hope that in the reports that come to the March meeting, we're told about the stumbling blocks, because there clearly are some stumbling blocks, because we were sitting 18 months ago saying this is really important, and it's escalating. So I hope that, you know, there'll be candour out there so that we can think, you know, what in practice can we do? That's my request, and I'll shut up on that point. The second one is very different. It's about adoption, and we had the annual report, and you can ask questions about special guardianship orders. In my, as it were, capacity as an independent member of the adoption panel, I try to go to their training. And one of the things that we've begun to be sort of hear about is what is called openness in modern adoption, which is essentially quite a major culture change in how adoptees and adopters and natural families, birth families, relate. And I'm wondering, I think it's something that we as a panel should more broadly know about, because it will have implications for things that we're talking about today, like special guardianship orders, but also for the work of the adoption teams. And I'm just sort of basically saying or suggesting, and hope you agree, that at a panel, you know, maybe in, you know, some beginning of the next municipal year, that we do get a report to tell us what is happening.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it may be something that we bring as a member development for all members, actually a member development session at some stage, to pick up on some of the nuances of modern day adoption. But Miranda, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just in relation to your comments about NEAT, and obviously I don't want to preempt the March panel, but what's happened is this work's going on in a number of areas of children's services. So what we've done in the last couple of months is brought that all together under the Corporate Parenting Board. So what you'll get in March is not only a report, which will be open about the stumbling blocks and things that are challenges, but also an action plan in terms of how we're addressing this across the various parts of children's services. It's not just children's social care. So there's services for young people, and virtual school are very involved in this as well. So that's just in relation to NEAT. We'd be very happy to either, as Fiona suggests, do a member development session or bring a paper to this panel, whichever is most appropriate, on modern adoption. And it's really good that you raise this. It's really, really interesting. It's certainly the way things are going. I mean, just in essence, it involves more contact with birth families. And what the research tells us is children that grow up knowing who their birth families are and having contact, if it's safe and appropriate, make better outcomes in their lives, and both as children and in their adult lives as well. So that, in essence, that's what we're talking about. But we'd be very happy to do either, whatever you think is more appropriate.
No, thank you very much, Miranda. And, you know, I think you only have to watch Long Lost Families to see the impact that can have when somebody doesn't know who their birth parents are. So, you know, this is a really positive step. So let's take this away and then we can have a conversation. And then just to pick up on and to reassure you, Anthony, that the March reports on increasing it will be all encompassing. As I said, you know, there can be some reasons why young people are not in education and employment training. For example, they may be parents. So, you know, that could be just one small example, and they're actually looking after a child. So it's about understanding why the data is the way it is. So that's going to be a really deep, and cross-cutting report, I think, that we can hopefully reassure and yet focus on where we need to be working moving ahead. Thank you, Peter, and then Leslie.
Thank you. I just want to go back to the question that Steve asked about the protection, the child protection reports. Sometimes they're going to be 1 or 2 days later. So How often does the panel meet? Because if they were to meet weekly, for example, they just say, well, actually, even if it's not ready, bring it to the panel because there may be something that needs doing, and then you can refer it over to the next one. So how often do they meet? That's the
Every day, Monday to Friday. Yeah. So there's a whole process around from when you decide when the multi-agency team decide actually yes we do need to have an initial child protection conference. There's a whole process around invitations, alerting professionals, booking, getting reports written up. That's where you need a period of time. If the request goes in all requests need to be made by day 8 really to get that conference in time. And within Miranda's service, that team work incredibly hard to get that in place. So even if the request is received late, they will still try and bring that conference in time. So there are, every day across the 3 different sites, conferences take place. There's a whole kind of process and business around that.
Would it be better to have a standard practice where, I'm not trying to teach anybody out the case or anything like that, but would it be better to have a standard practice where it is at the panel in time, and if there is other work that needs to be done, then find that can be brought back? It
relies on the request being made in time, and all those other pieces of the jigsaw have to be in place ahead of having that conference. Okay. But whenever, if it is, as I say, if it is slightly delayed in terms of the request, the team work incredibly hard to bring that in. And we need to also make sure that our parents are prepared for conference. Initial child protection conference is a really serious and difficult. Much we try not to make it, it's still a difficult process for families, and so get the best from that. We still need to be happy that our families are in the best place to work alongside us to provide the most appropriate plan to support their children.
Okay.
Thank you, Miranda. You wanted to come in.
Just to quickly add to that, so it's actually a dedicated meeting for each child rather than a panel like this, sort of sitting and people coming in. And Janet's right, it's really important that family members are prepared because it can be quite upsetting. And we want it to be a meeting where we can engage with them and get them to recognise the concerns and get them to agree what needs to be done. So we don't want to alienate them, so it has to be carefully done. So just to add, if it's ever late, that needs senior management agreement. We don't just, it doesn't just happen. So we're very aware of the ones that are late, and it has to be agreed. And so occasionally, and I'm just not trying to make excuses for lateness or anything, but occasionally it's appropriate because it will all sort of hinge around people's diaries and when particular family members can make it and things like that. So sometimes we might agree for it to be a day late so that a key auntie can come or what have you. Again, to make sure the meeting goes as well as possible.
Thank you, Miranda. Leslie, please.
I just want about adoption. There's somebody I know of who had no contact with the birth family. The birth family did not want to know her. And she's suffering now really badly with complex PTSD is what they've said. And she's reluctant to go out. It's somebody who's now in their 30s. And I just wondered how much support there is for someone like that, because I don't know where her birth family were from, but I do know that that has really, really affected her very, very badly now. And it's just very concerning. I mean, she was adopted. She grew up in she was well provided for. I don't know how much emotional support she got, but obviously it's really affected her nowadays. So
that sounds very sad, and we know that back in the past that adoptions were very closed, and that people often people grew up not even knowing they were adopted, which is incredibly sad. And that sounds like a particularly sad case. We have a post-adoption support service, and they are required to provide support through the lifespan, so both to children and to adults. And I'd be very happy to provide any details outside of this if that's helpful.
If you could.
Sure, no problem.
May I just say one thing? I mean,
yes,
it's actually response to what Les just said. I mean, and this is in a way the approaches and the role of the county council. It could be another aspect, which is that if contact becomes the norm, it may be the case that people who in past years didn't have any contact may look to us with that sort of question. Again, it's something maybe we can think about when we discuss it in full.
Yeah, no, thank you, Anthony. And that's incredibly sad, but I'm very pleased that there is post-adoption support. So yes, if you two could liaise outside of the meeting, that would be great, and I hope your friend gets the support she needs. Thank you. Dee, please.
Thank you. Can you give us a little bit more of an update regarding the early help services for young people at 6.8? I noticed there's a number of interventions that have been recorded, and there seems to be a lot of remarkable work going on by youth workers, 749 interventions there, nearly 2,000 from schools and colleges across the county, personal advisors, and also interventions by the employment and training advisors. But I noticed there's a decrease in this. So could you explain to me why, please?
Yes. Thank you. So this sits within our Services for Young People portfolio. There could be a whole range of reasons around why that is. It could be around availability. It could be around. So I think I probably need to go away and find that out for you and come back if that's okay. So, yeah.
No, thank you, Janet. So Paul is going to.
So I'll double check it, but there may be a seasonal element to that as well, because the period reporting includes school holidays and a lot of the support is via schools. So that may be it, but I'll go back and I'll double check that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Although the performance data comes here, and it does technically sit with ELL because it's services for young people, but absolutely question raised. So let's see what the response is. Thank you very much. Nigel, please.
Chair, can I just try 6.9 again? I know we talked before, but the one of the parents has said that, I know you said that there were no SEND officers here, but obviously Jo is online, if she's still there, I'm assuming, and it's more of a strategic question, so it's not asking detail. May I ask it, as it's much more strategic about EHCPs, it's not a detailed, talking about figures or anything. And as it was addressed to this panel, because a lot of these questions came up on our agenda. And as I say, we said earlier on, parents won't know that, oh, well, they're not really to be answered here, when they've come up on there. So I just really wanted to put it forward for Jo to answer.
And I think, we've had this conversation in the past, haven't we, about sort of getting into the detail of EHCs and SEND performance. And it's absolutely right that it sits with ELL with Caroline's panel. And that was why I referred to it initially, to say, well, actually, performance of EHC and the in-depth conversations and having officers present is really important to those conversations. So we can give a bit like services for young people, that the last question from Dee, we can put forward, well, this is what we think, but actually it's better for it to sit within the other panel, ELL. Jo, I noticed you're online. Did you want to just come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, I mean, I'm not quite sure what question Nigel's going to ask or is hoping to ask. But Nigel, if it's a question around EHCP, timeliness and all that kind of stuff to do with the EHCPs, that should correctly be discussed at the ELL panel, where we have our SEND officers. So it might be that you just want to refer the question that you've got over there so that we can pick it up and give a proper response at that panel. What I wouldn't want to do is try and answer it here without having the appropriate officers at this meeting.
Sure you could, but anyway, I'll send it to you anyway now.
Yeah, absolutely. If you send it over, I mean, we will make sure we cover it off. I can give you that assurance.
Thank you very much. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Jo. Colleagues, any other questions or comments on the performance report? No, Paul, thank you very much, and to all officers, because when you look at the infographic, the number of performance indicators in the top 3 quartiles is really significant. That shows the really strong performance. And of course, that was reflected in our ILACS inspection when we were rated outstanding for children's services. And, we know the climate is challenging, and we are seeing more children and young people with complex issues and so requiring additional support. So to see the strong performance continue, and I was particularly pleased to see the reduction in first-time entrance to the youth justice system, which has halved, which is tremendous, because clearly, if through partnership working, we young people can be kept out of youth justice system, that's incredibly significant for their lives and for their outcomes. So they're really strong performance. Thank you to officers who, day in, day out are working hard to ensure that our children and young people really can be supported and achieve their best outcomes. We've noted the areas where we want additional focus. I've said one of my priorities is increasing the number of care leavers in education, employment and training, and we will be having reports coming to the next meeting in March on that. So we will be having a much more detailed conversation about that particular topic. So colleagues, we're asked to scrutinise the performance and comment on any areas for improvement or interest which we have, a couple of actions to take away which we will then come back with and a few updates to be given. So colleagues, can I just see by a show of hands that we note the report? Thank you very much. That's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. Agenda item 5 is any other part 1 business, none notified. And the date of the next meeting is the 14th of March at 10 a.m. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody again for their contributions, commitment, debate. It's always an interesting panel to chair. So thank you very much. And goodbye. Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.